Thank you, Rob. It's good to see all of you today. It's good to see so many good friends and faces, too. Terry, thanks for coming. You came from Houston to come down and see us.
Well, I did. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you guys hear him okay?
All right, good.
Yeah, just hold it up a little closer.
A little louder, like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll remind you. So I wanted to kind of start the conversation about decisions, because I think that a lot of the conversation that we've had over the years and a lot of what your book is about decisions. So if you could just kind of talk to us, like, how did you make decisions when you were in your 20s? You were a young businessman. You were in your 20s and 30s. How did you make decisions back then, and how has that changed for you in life?
Well, I guess the best word is poorly. I was, being from the South, I thought I was a Christian. But as time marched on, I was a huge people pleaser and a huge overachiever, from trying to get the approval of my parents. And that was my drivers. I was probably the worst I was probably a bigger people pleaser than anybody in this room. And that being an overachiever pretty well guarantees a crash. So, but during those 15 years before I crashed, I was a decent businessman in terms of decisions and success, and always thought I was nice to everybody, but I was always being manipulative and trying to get what I wanted. So my decisions were pretty much self-oriented. Like I said, I was decent at business, but most of us are, really, when we set our mind to it. And so I was a poor husband and a poor father also, because I was always preoccupied how to make a deal or manipulate or talk somebody into something. So nothing too proud about.
A lot of the time when you were at that part in your early career, you said you're a driver. I've seen this a lot in the book, in the conversation. You know, you've been past that, and we'll get to it further, but like, give us a sense about how much of that drive was there. You talk about it a little bit in your book, just you doing so much, not seeing your family as much, you know, even the dinners that you were trying to get a hold of and the people you were trying to talk to. Just give us a sense, like, what that was like. How, you were enjoying it in some regard, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a purpose, and that was to overachieve, to get a lot of money, to try to finally get my approval of my parents. Of course, I didn't know that. Took therapy in my mid-30s to find out why I was a people pleaser and why I was overdriven, and to try to get both those back in check. But yeah, no, when I was in my 20s and early 30s, I can't tell you how stupid I was. I mean, we started a company and when I was 31, and I was a minority partner, and majority partner, I ran around like our head was cut off, chicken with the head cut off. I mean, one time we were getting off the plane, and the flight attendant said, "Sirs, y'all have on each other's sports coat." And went, "Oh, or a suit coat." And we went and tried to buy a business one time, and when we landed, we go, "You got any money?" He said, "I don't have any cash." "You got any cash?" "I don't have any cash." And he says, I hope a restaurant takes credit card, or we're probably not going to buy this business, I mean, it just was constantly, I mean, he'd call me late at night, and my poor wife would just watch me, and then watch me flame out over time of me just working and flying and going and blowing.
And when you were doing that, you felt like you were achieving your purpose in a lot of ways, right?
Absolutely. My wife knew better, but, well, it was my purpose.
Yeah.
And I was achieving it, and I did achieve it. We did sell our company right at my burnout, and part of the reason I burned out is I caught my false god, which was, again, I thought I was a Christian, but money was my real god, and I caught it, and I wasn't. You're not supposed to catch your god. That doesn't equate. So that was part of my burnout.
And when give some of the group, because I imagine some in the book haven't read the book, but tell them when you say burnout, what that was. Tell them.
Well, I started getting dizzy, and I went to a doctor, and he said it was stress, and I said, well, give me some pills for that, and he said no, and I went, darn, I thought everybody could get pills when you wanted it. So anyway, I went about my way, and I could function with the dizziness. It wasn't like vertigo. And then my brain started getting fuzzy. I got to where I couldn't make big decisions, and then I got to where I couldn't make small decisions. And then on a Saturday morning, I had 2 daughters, and on a Saturday morning, my brain quit. And what I mean by that, I don't even know exactly what I mean by that, because I was still present and knew who was in the room, where I was, and whatever. But what it chose to do is it chose to not make any decisions. Like third party, it just wasn't going to engage in any kind of decision at all. It just kind of shut down, kind of like a marathon runner that ran too long and the legs just quit. They just quit. My brain just quit, but I knew who I was with and where I was. So my wife helped me get to the bedroom because I didn't know what was going on. And I just laid in bed and cried because I thought I'd lost my most prized possession in my life, which honestly, on that quest that you were referring to, I probably, if I was really honest, I felt my brain was more important to me than my wife or my daughters. So I cried, and I was a deacon in the church, and so I got on and getting ready to be ordained as an elder, and so I got on my knees at the bed and just told the Lord to take control of my life, that I think I'd lost it, my prized possession. And I figured out about a year later that I had been born again. And the reason was I thought I was a Christian, but what I found out really is he was really my Santa Claus. I prayed, I believed, but I would tell him like a 6-year-old, I want a fire truck. I want you to fix this deal. I want this deal to happen. I want my wife to act better. I want my kids to act better. I was telling him what to do, and it wasn't working too well. So that launched into a huge amount of therapy where I, again, dealt with my burnout and my insecurities and all that stuff.
How long did you go through that initial process of recovering from that burnout to the point that you started Texon?
Well, it was almost 4 years. It was ironic. I mean, we sold the company right then to a big utility. And so I was just an employee for them and actually demoted myself two levels down in my company. So I didn't, just because I really wanted to work on myself and changing in life. And so, and then I was trying to figure out, in that 4 years, I got pretty, identity crisis, go through all that stuff. And probably 4 years before the Lord convicted me to start the company I just sold.
And you didn't start Texon not having things figured out, correct? Like you were wanting to do Texon differently, because from what I understand, the company you sold and Texon were basically the same company, right?
Right, same business line.
Yeah, so same business line. and it was almost like you were jumping back into the fire. You know, you had some you were driving before, and the company that you were in, you know, helped facilitate that. It was enabling it. And now you go through your burnout, you work through a process, 4 years, you decide to start Texon. It's basically the same thing. How did you think to do it differently? Like, what was your mindset going into Texon now as opposed to before the burnout?
Well, my thought was I had all this experience. The gentleman that was my boss, the principal owner, I mean, he was very gifted at business, and I learned a lot. And so now I had done a bunch of therapy, became a Christian, and so I thought to duplicate what we already knew how to do it with the Lord and some wholeness, I thought would be actually a walk in the park. And of course it wasn't. I've never known a company startup that was a walk in the park. And so anyway, but that was my thinking.
So give us all a sense of what that process was. The book's called Sacred Pace. A lot of people say, what is that sacred pace that you did? And I also appreciated when you said in your answer, you said you were going to do this company with the Lord, right?
Right. And I've been blessed with that. Actually, because I was always preoccupied and not a good husband and not a good father, I chose to, and didn't really have a relationship with the Lord, who has all the answers. I chose to, he convicted me to start Texon, which I don't even recommend this, 40 hours a week and no metric sales goals. And therefore, no metric sales goals so they wouldn't be false gods to be driving me, and no metric sales goals so I just organically grow the company at the pace that it made sense, and not let false numbers and false goals drive me. Like I said, I don't recommend that, but what I do recommend is anything that the Lord convicts you of, you should do. And he convicted me of that, and I actually told him, I said, "This is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Who can start a business 40 hours a week and no sales goals?" And basically, my sense was, he said, "You going to trust me, or are you going to trust Western culture?" I go, "Well, Western culture hadn't been bad in terms of success in revenue and profits and all that. Pretty bad in terms of success at home. Clearly mine was." So but the irony of Texon was it became the largest private company in revenue in Houston 20 years into it at $6 billion in revenue and we became the largest private company in Houston. And so it's kind of ironic that the Lord allowed that to happen with no metric goals and no sales goals.
And so when you were looking at no metric goals, I imagine you did have some goals. You told me before when you were talking with customers, you kind of had a particular way to do that. Give us a sense of what that is, because I think I like this approach.
Again, kind of going against Western culture, what we learned, if you listen to a prospective customer or prospective employee long enough and truly listen over meals, they'll actually start coaching you how to do the deal. Now that takes a lot of patience, and it takes time and travel in terms of the prospective customer being out of the office, but even with donations for nonprofits, I've spoken to a lot of nonprofits. If you listening hadn't gone out of style with the Lord, and it hadn't gone out of style with your soul. You like to be heard. And what you find out in customers is usually they think their biggest issue is price. But if you listen to them long enough and let them talk, where they finally get out of the office and get to visiting, and they finally start realizing price isn't their biggest problem, X, Y, or Z is their biggest problem, and then you try to help, and then they start trying to coach you of how to help them solve X, Y, or Z, and then you become a lifelong customer. We've got well over 100 customers at Texon, and often we lose no customers in a year because one of the big competitors, public competitors, said, I don't know what Texon does, but don't try to take away their business. All you do is mess up the price because you can't take their business away. Because we always get last look. We're in the commodity business, crude oil and all kind of things. But so I mean, it works. Try listening to your wife really well. It works. But how well do we do at that? Not too well, because we're too busy.
How did you start listening to the Lord?
Pain. Lots of pain.
Yeah, and then in that pain, what was the Lord telling you of how to do that? Because you set up a process, you set up even some steps to be able to make sure that at least the pain was a little bit more bearable, correct?
Right. Well, I ended up, for 25 years, he had taught me how to discern his will on major business decisions and major life decisions, and he taught me in a way that I thought it was teachable and transferable to the average person in the pew who has really a big need and a big decision make and kind of perceives the Lord never gives them an answer. Well, over 25 years at least, he'd kind of taught me from the beginning kind of how to discern his will. And not that I'm that spiritual or whatever, it's just through a lot of pain he taught me. And I called it my secret weapon in business, because most Christians didn't really try to seek his will around whether to sell a business, buy a business. I mean, we started a lot of business, sold a lot. And a lot of times my board would go against me or disagree with me, or my executive team. But if I got peace in my gut from the Lord, so the book points out kind of the steps to go through in that, and in life, and it's been it was a real blessing for me.
Can we walk through the steps real quick?
Well, the first one is consult my friend Jesus. I mean, he knows everything. I used to say I'd be my partner in business, but then I realized we were so unequally yoked. He already knew the answer, and I'm just chasing behind trying to figure it out. But so I would just start praying that I really wanted his will more than mine, because he sees the future. He knows best, absolutely knows best, and loves everybody I'm dealing with way more than me. So why would I not want to do his will on a project or a business deal? And pride, greed, fear, anger, insecurities, whatever, of not paying the price and not wanting to do it. So as I prayed, the next step is I'd do due diligence. I'd gather the facts just like you do on any business project. And the process was helping me process it, helping my gut get a sense of the truth. And so I would do due diligence and all kinds of different things. And the book points out some different things: pros and cons list, motive list, trying to figure yourself out. A lot of times your opinion, you really start paying attention, you'll start seeing often your opinions you think are facts, and they're really just your opinion. You start paying attention, and it's amazing. But as you're praying for objectivity, you start seeing that they're not facts, they're opinions. And you also start seeing that you give the answers you want way too much weight, and the answers you don't want discount it way too much. I mean, if you're really trying to be objective and sense what the Lord really thinks is best, you start giving equal weight to things like that. And third step is to watch for circumstances. Psalm 37:4 says, delight in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. Can you imagine the Lord Almighty says, delight in the Lord, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. And so I think he'll point out circumstances that matter for you to really pay attention to. And the last step, and the reason I wrote the book, is if you finally get where you want his will more than your own, and don't kid yourself, it's very painful to die to self to get to that point. But when you finally get to that point, you'll get a sense in your gut that's undeniable. Like that 40-hour-a-week thing. I'm going, that's the stupidest thing I've ever sensed. But it was clear as a bell, that's what I was supposed to do. And again, he sees the future. He knows best. And as I told my grandson, he called me the other day, and he was trying to go through a decision with a girl in college, and he was trying to go through this process. And I said, well, just know when I decided to do 40 hours a week, I had no idea whether Texan would be successful or not. I just knew I'd jump off the cliff and do that. So if you decide whether to ask that girl out or not, it doesn't mean she's going to say yes, or it doesn't mean it's going to turn into a girlfriend. Just get peace about whether you're supposed to ask her out or not. And so it was fun to kind of talk to my grandson about that. So anyway, I've been blessed. And so I decided after 25 years, really hadn't been sharing that with anybody other than my family, a couple friends, and finally started sharing and seeing whether people thought it made any sense. I mean, it worked for me, and lo and behold, it turned into a book, and here I am speaking today.
One of the things
go figure.
Yeah, go figure. One of the things I love about this is that there have been, there's this whole talk about decision analysis and thinking through making the right choices, and there's all this discussion about trying to watch our bias and things like that. And you just said, well, why don't I consult the Lord? How did that build your faith?
He just got it all figured out. It takes the rest of our life to figure out he's got it all figured out. We are so self-serving. We think we know best, or we think we know what we want, and what kind of like before I crashed and burned. I'm gonna meet with my writer after this. She lives in Nashville and drove over here to talk about another book. And honestly, if the Lord wants me to write one, I doubt that the publisher let me title this. But what is deep in my soul is, when I surrender, I win. I may not win at the moment, but when I surrender and I end up doing what He says to do, one way or the other, could be just from Scripture, I've never not won, never. And so you build confidence. You tried something, and turns out the 40-hour week turned out where I could be a decent husband and a decent father in a ridiculously successful company, and kept doing that 40 hours a week for 35 years. Had one outside investor that was a board member. I sold him 0.5% of the company, and the other day, or back in the spring before we closed, he says, "Terry, you know how your return on your investment's been as a company since he bought in '02?" And I said, "No, not really. It's just done well." He said, "Well, I've kept up with how my investment is, and it's been a 45% internal rate of return every year for 22 years. I go, "Well, that's pretty good, but I can only tell you, anytime I'll surrender, and I often don't, I'm big a sinner as anybody in here, but when I do, eventually I get to look back and I won. Every time."
What does it look like when you don't surrender? Like, what happens?
Which time?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, you've mentioned before, you've been in the process where you try to do a deal, where you try to work with some sort of client, and it took you a while to get neutral, that last step. And I imagine that was a little bit of you not surrendering a little bit, right?
Like a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm convinced that until you surrender and decide you want his will more than your own, he doesn't give you an answer because he's kind of wasting his time. Now, granted, God's God, and he can do anything he wants and does do anything he wants when he wants. But my experience has been in my little world, until I surrender, I don't get an answer. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane had a preference. So it's okay to have a preference. Jesus just said, but not my will, but yours. But he went on record of, I don't really want to carry the weight of the sins of the world on the cross, to the cross. But he immediately said, not my will, your will. It takes me weeks, if not well over a month. The bigger the decision, the harder it is to die.
Yeah.
So this process is kind of painful, but it's just a huge blessing if you choose to surrender and jump off the cliff. What I didn't put in the book enough about a chapter, if you're going to go through all this process and it's very seldom something you want to do. And the reason is, his answer is very seldom something you want to do, because he loves you so much, he wants you to die to some of your junk, some of your dysfunction, some of yourself. He loves you too much. And so the answer is going to be something like the 40-hour a week. I'm going, like, really? That's like one arm tied behind my back. That's crazy. So it felt stupid or ridiculous. And usually they weren't that material, for sure. But the point being, you usually don't like it. But if you're going to go through all that process, have the courage to jump off the cliff and be blessed by it.
Yeah, and you've done, over the years, you do a lot to try to keep good spiritual practices to be able to help you to get to that point so it's easier to surrender, right?
For sure. It's a journey. I mean, I'm just as human as the next guy or person. And so, I get up in the morning and spend time. But over time, it gets to where it's a joy rather than a burden or obligation. One of the things I try to convey is, once you kind of try to start surrendering and following him, it ends up being a joy, not a burden or an obligation. Just like if you find giving a burden or obligation or pain, I tell people to give less. Go down, give less and give it to something that matters to you, that's impacted you in life, or your children in life. Get to where and you get to see the success of it, or see what's accomplished by your money. Get to where it's a joy to give, and then you'll probably want to start giving more away. I mean, I've been giving away half my income since '98, so 24 years. But it's a joy for me, and it didn't hurt my company. Actually, it made me a much better businessman, because no longer do I try to hoard the decisions and try to hoard decisions or swing for fence with stupid odds with too much money because I wanted to win too much, or I wanted to protect myself too much. So not that anybody needs to give away 50% in that regard at all. All I'm saying is he gifted me with the joy of giving, and so it relinquished my stronghold on money, and therefore I was a lot better businessman, actually. I mean, his ways just work. I'm telling you, they just work.
Yeah, it's. You said you've been doing that for a while. You told me at one point that you had a spell where you weren't getting neutral very much in the business, and you had some folks kind of calling you out on it. You had to
Right.
You had to mention that to your employees and some of your key people that you weren't doing that process as well.
Right.
Tell us about that.
My biggest fear is that I would burn out again. And so when I started Texon with the 40 hours a week, no sales goals and all that, that was going real well. And then after about, let's see, I don't know, 10, 15 years, it was 15 years, 14 years, 15. We lost our biggest customer. And I started speeding up because, I mean, we were still profitable. We were profitable every year, 35 years, except the first year of just getting it off the ground. But I for 2 years, I pressed in to getting my company back up to a higher level again. And in that 2-year window, I didn't really notice how hard I was pushing. Was I working more than 40 hours a week? I don't even know. I might have kept that boundary, but I was still spending time with the Lord. But I was like a dog with a bone. I was going to turn that company around, so I was very focused, and we turned it around in about 2 years. And then I went, oh my gosh, I had gone back to way too focused on business, way too focused on money, way too focused on success. And after 2 years, I came out of my stupor, and I was telling the guy, head of IT, I said, I'm back. He said, well, you may be back, but you've left a heck of a wave behind your boat. And so then I read a book, Lead Like Jesus by Ken Blanchard. And in that book, I realized I thought I was this amazing servant heart leader. And I learned over those 15 years I had been a servant leader, but very much about me still. And so that book helped me demarcate for the next 15 years to truly try to be a servant heart from God's perspective. And while the Lord used my sin and losing that big account, he wanted to break me. And as my spiritual mentor, I was lamenting about my sin speeded me up because my fear of failure. He said, well, don't give yourself so much credit for your sin. The Lord had an objective, and you are now a decent servant leader versus one you just thought you were.
So you'd say you'd do it again.
Say that again?
You said you would, so effectively you're saying like you would do that again. You would go through that to be able to be a better...
Oh, yeah. Now, do I want to? No. But, I've learned there's a real blessing around suffering if you choose to do something about it. If you choose to go through it and not dodge it. Eventually the pain, possibly, so the perceived pain of doing, say your pain of your circumstance and issues of this high, and the perceived pain of making the change to where the suffering go away is this high. Say this is therapy, just picking something. Well, until this pain of the circumstance gets this high, you don't do therapy, for example, or confront your wife, or confess to your wife, or start being a good father until the pain of your kids getting in trouble or whatever, and until they get in too much trouble. Then you decide, well, I better change my way I work. And so that's just kind of the way it is.
And you had people around you too. I mean, you're head of IT for one, because you had that kind of dialogue with a lot of folks that work with you. But you had others around you too to be able to help you get that signal, right? Understand that, try to get you out of that uncomfortableness. And
I was way too driven to listen. Yeah, until the pain, we're pitiful. I mean, we're pitiful. We're pretty much into what we think. If you're objective, then you listen to your wife and spouse, or you listen to the people you work around us. But if you're hell bent on doing something, I didn't listen. Don't listen. Like one gentleman said to me, "Terry, you're a very good listener." And I said, "When I want to."
Tell us about, you were telling me you were just recently sold Texon, and you had 2 prayers that you wanted to have through the process. Can you share what those are?
Yeah, and for you in here that are kind of new to Christianity or kind of wondering about Christianity, this one prayer may sound pretty stupid. So, and it might have been, whatever. So my 2 prayers were, one is the Lord, I think, was glorified in the beginning at Texon with the success we had, with those boundaries we had. And so it made a good story about Him and not about me. So my prayer was that we would finish Texon in a way that He'd be glorified, that if I wrote another book, that He would be the highlight of the book and not me. So that was one of my 2 prayers. The other prayer was, because you're giving up your identity, you're giving up your baby, you're the founder, and you need to move on in life. My other prayer is that He would make me suffer as much as I needed. It was a year-long process to sell the company, hiring an investment banker and going out and seeking buyers and bids and process and negotiate and all that. Took about a year. Took actually a little over a year. But I said, I'd like you to make me suffer, and that I'll plow through and try to grow from the suffering the amount that you think I need, so when I finish, I'll be done with being my identity, and I can go on to do whatever I'm supposed to do in life, and not hang on to my want to talk about my company, and I want to have all this remiss. And He blessed me. I have had no regrets about the sale. So, and I did suffer, and I tried to grow from it. And in the middle of negotiations, I'd go in there and try to be objective, what we call getting neutral in the book. I try to be neutral and see what was going to happen.
Of those 4 steps that you line out in the book, which one do you feel like is the most important one? Or do you have, would you say like, hey, I got to make sure?
Obviously, prayer is always the number one, but God isn't Santa Claus. He won't do what you can do, and you can't do what He can do. So I said He really wouldn't, I don't believe that He'll give you an answer to a major issue in life until you're ready to receive it. You know, like no one likes unsolicited advice. So I think the biggest step, George Mueller had a discernment process that's obviously very good. He was the 1800s missionary, spiritual giant, and he had a discernment process. But he said 90% of discerning God's will is solved when you want His will more than your own. The rest of it, he's, reading scripture, praying and this and that, 4 or 5 good 6 steps. But 90% of the problem is resolved when you want his will more than your own. And it is painful. The bigger the issue, the more pain it is. But when I was writing that book, they were asking me, well, give me examples where you were disappointed in God's answer. I said, never. I was only disappointed when I never got to the point of getting neutral enough to do his answer.
It sounds like in many ways that the pain and the suffering that you're talking about, I think you can all agree that I'm not a bodybuilder, so I don't do a lot of work in the gym. But there's a lot of working out in this process, and you enjoy that, even though it's hard and it's painful. The outcome of it is far better and far more rewarding than just the pain.
Well, like I said, I've had a lot of examples. So you build. I've been working out roughly 4 days a week for a lot of years. I hate working out, but it's got its benefit, right? And I'll be 76 this month, and I've still got good health. Was that because of working out? I don't know. Probably not. But at least I hadn't hurt and strained and pulled a lot of things at my age. So yeah, but you gotta. If you hear one thing today from me, the love that our sweet daddy has for you is beyond your wildest dreams. He's not trying to get you to be something. He's trying to love you into existence of joy, of love, where you're more loving, more peaceful, more joyful, more patient, more kind. He's not trying to get you to be dutiful. I get frustrated when I go to these churches and hear, you need to be this and be that. That's all fine. But he just loves you incredibly. And he just wants to give you the fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace and patience and goodness and kindness and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control. What are those? Which ones are those y'all don't want? I call him my sweet daddy. He's unbelievable of how much he wants you to enjoy life. One of the statements I tell people is he wants you to come alive. People worry that I'm not supposed to do this, not supposed to do that. I should maybe go do a ministry versus business. Business made me come alive. He wanted me to come alive. I didn't know he was going to want 35 years later me to get up and speak about my sweet daddy. I didn't have any idea what was going on. I just went and did I was a deal junkie. I love deals. And I did what I get to come alive. He's just sweet. So that if you don't hear anything else from me, don't ever forget that.
Thanks, Terry. We have time for one or two questions. So I think that if you have a question, just raise your hand high so I can see it, and then I'll answer it. Steve?
Yeah, could you elaborate on the concept of reaching neutrality or being neutral?
He asked, could I elaborate on the concept of neutrality or getting neutral or dying to self? It's really hard. To lay yourself down. There's an author that talks about false self and true self. False self is what you gained as a kid. It's kind of who you developed over time. True self is who God really made you to be. So the whole life is you're trying to give up this false self and become the true self that he wants you to be. So dying to any steps along the way of getting neutral to do what he really wants you to do as the true self is dying to self. it's hard. And some people, this is one step that I wanted to share with people that work for me. My best friend does it a completely different way, but he eventually, like George Mueller says, he eventually, however he gets there, he eventually gets to where he wants to do God's will more than his own because of his belief in sweet daddy loves him too much to not do it.
It's like it's like active humility. You're actively trying to be less so he can be more.
And what's interesting is you're dying to selfishness to effectively receive something that's selfish in the sense I used to feel guilty about seeking his will and getting his will and implementing his answers. I really did. I went through 3 or 4, because I didn't ever talk to anybody about this. I went through 3 or 4, 5 years of feeling guilty that I'd get his sneaky answer and I'd implement it and it'd work. Finally, I realized, no, I think I died to self over. I think I actually, gave something up. And finally realized, no, I didn't. I mean, that's just his gift to me. But I had to give up self to get it.
Let me get this guy in the back then.
Terry, can you talk about how your conversion sort of impacted the culture?
Would you say that a little louder?
How your conversion impacted the culture of Texon.
Was it
How your culture impacted your conversion impacted the culture of Texon?
Exactly. And how did you incorporate your faith into
I think y'all heard the question. I just organically, I didn't do a Bible study ever at the office. Somebody want to have a Bible study? Fine. They learned to trust me because I was just trying. I really had the easiest job in company. I mean, occasionally it got, pretty tense. But my boss was God. Their boss was a human. So all I wanted to do is get to where, well, let me say it this way. Over the years, they just learned to trust me. My treasurer was not a Christian, and he'd go, and he was very money motivated, and he goes, I don't know what Terry does when we got to make one of those decisions, but let's let him do that. It seems to work out pretty good. So now people say, well, what's your company think about people? The industry think about your company? I don't know. You just go ask them. I will say in 35 years we were never sued by anybody, and we never sued anybody, including employees, but. That nobody backed me in a corner. I was willing to said, sue me. Don't be thinking I'm a chicken. Don't try that, because let's just get it on. But suing never seems to work. Why don't we try to work something out? And I was always able to.
Yeah, Terry, you said working 40 hours a week, God bless that business part of you greatly. And the other 100 and something hours a week, what did he guide you to do with that 100 and something hours? How did he bless you in that? And looking back on it, what means more to you now? How he blessed you in your business, or how he blessed you in those other hours, and how he guided you?
The question was, okay, 40 hours a week I put in business. How did he bless me in the other hours? Well, the whole purpose in the 40 is so I could I finally had a relationship with the Lord, and I'd like to keep it. And I had finally a decent relationship with my wife, and I wanted to keep it. And I had a decent relationship, and growing relationship with my daughters, and I wanted to really invest in that before they went off to college. And then I wanted to do some ministry and give back. But one of the greatest evangelists of all times, Louis Palau, he was kind of in the Hispanic world, around the world. And he probably evangelized in front of millions and millions of people. One of the guys I was with the other day went to his funeral, and nothing was said about how great evangelist he was. So that tells you what's going to be said at my funeral or your funeral about how successful you in business. Compared to Louis Palau, my daytime work pales in comparison, and at his funeral, they still never said a word. The grandkids got up and talked about how great a granddad he was versus saving all these. You would think they'd get up and talk about all the people he'd saved in the world. No. It's back to values. At the funeral, they talk values.
Everyone, thanks Terry for being here, please.